Hello, friends, and welcome to another audio episode here on my Substack, where I have been covering the most controversial of controversial topics. And continuing that theme, today we are diving into understanding celebrity and elite gender inversion, what that is, why it's happening, and just how common it is among people who we look up to, or the Matrix would have us look up to, in Hollywood, in fashion, in technology, and in politics. Now, I have a feeling that some people are going to be tuning in to listen today just because of the title of this audio episode. It can seem so far out there. Some people might be thinking, let me just tune in and see how crazy Lauren has gone. How far off the deep end of untenable conspiracy theories has Lauren gone? And if that's you, I am genuinely delighted to be of service to your entertainment today. You can grab some popcorn, sit back. I can promise you, you will be very entertained. And if you are here genuinely curious to understand some of the hidden truths in our world, then I can promise you that this episode, if it is presenting this new concept to you of elite gender inversion and how common it is, that this information can feel quite disorienting, quite disturbing. It can really rock your boat for a little while, but it's worth going through that discomfort to have this information, because it is so key to understanding what's really happening in the Matrix and how we can reclaim our power. This ties into so many aspects of hidden truth in the world and what's really happening in Hollywood, what's really happening in the political arena. I first shared about this topic of gender inversion on February 13th, 2024. I published a post here on Substack, and it is one of my few paid posts. At that time, I chose to only make it available to people who truly wanted the information, and they weren't just going to reject it and leave ridiculous comments because the information seemed so far out there, which is understandable why some people would do that. But I put it behind a paywall for that reason. However, I am making this episode freely available because I do believe the consciousness of humanity has opened up to this concept quite a bit now in the last year. In particular, I want to give a big shout out to Candace Owens for her amazing series on Brigitte Macron, the first lady, first man really, of France. And so she has done her due diligence with research and working with an incredible team of journalists, and she has the receipts. So anybody who watches that series, I would say 99.9% of people, if they have a functioning brain and they actually watch that series, are going to come away with the conclusion that yes, Brigitte Macron is a biological man who presents as a woman and who groomed young President Macron when he was very, very young, okay? So we have the receipts for that. That's now out more in the common consciousness. And just having that as one example, I invite you to entertain the question, what if that's just the tip of the iceberg? What if this is actually a very, very, very common practice among Hollywood, the fashion industry, technology industry, and the political arena? And I'm going to be providing some information as to why I think that is an accurate conclusion we can draw. One reason why it is so important for me to share about this topic and why I've done so much research about it is because a big piece of my soul work on Earth is to help women heal the relationship with our bodies. Because it is a form of spiritual warfare that women have been coerced under military-grade propaganda to hate our bodies, to believe that the only way to find happiness and confidence and healthy relationships is to literally mutilate our bodies, to offer them up on the altar of cosmetic surgery and disordered eating and Botox. All of this is a form of spiritual warfare to divorce us from our bodies, which are the most accurate truth-sensing devices available to humanity. Yes, men's bodies are absolutely powerful and intuitive, and there is something particularly potent about women's connection to our bodies and to our intuition and to God as a result of that. And it truly is women who have healed our relationship with our bodies, reconnected to our intuition unquestioningly. We are going to be leading this great awakening on planet Earth right now. You can take my word for that. It is a magnificent thing to see. And so for me, there's so much healing for humanity around this topic as women start to reclaim our sense of partnership with our bodies rather than feeling like we're trapped in bodies that we need to change and mutilate and distort to fit a beauty standard. I wrote a book about this topic. It's called The Invisible Corset: Break Free from Beauty Culture and Embrace Your Radiant Self. And that came out in 2021. I'll link it with this episode. It is such a powerful read to catalyze your journey of healing your relationship with your body, especially if you have trauma around body image issues, food, and weight. It's really going to catalyze a lot for you. And I did not know about gender inversion when I wrote that book. But shortly after that book came out, I was having dinner with my mentor, Brenda Pantango. I've talked about her in a previous audio episode here, my last episode, where I discussed psychedelic so-called plant medicines. I do not believe they are medicinal, like ayahuasca, psilocybin, other substances like that, and why I do not recommend them under any circumstances, especially for sensitive souls or cases of addiction and trauma. Again, controversial, most controversial topics. If you want to learn more, go check out that audio post. But I talk about Brenda Pantango and what I've learned from her in that arena, because it really has to deal with the energetic biology of the human body, and she is an expert in that. So going back to my story, I was having dinner with Brenda and talking about my book. I believe I said something about Victoria's Secret models. And Brenda told me, she's like, well, you know they're mostly men, right? And I looked at her and my jaw just dropped. I was like, what? What are you saying? And she's like, oh yeah, they are actually biological men who are transgendered. And that's what Victoria's Secret actually is. And the gears in my head stopped. I just couldn't fathom this. I was like, wait a minute, these women who have been put in front of us as the pinnacle of unattainable beauty standards, you're telling me this is actually biological men? How can this be? So that started my journey down the rabbit hole, as they say, into gender inversion and how widespread it is in, like I said, Hollywood, politics, fashion, and technology in particular, among what we would call the elites, and in particular, generational Satanist families, which tend to have a lot of control in those arenas. I'm going to get more into that later on in this episode because it's really important to understand the organized religion of Satanism and how it pertains to this practice of gender inversion. One of the foundations that I had in place that was useful for me to integrate this new information was an understanding of Freemasonry and Satanism in our culture. And so I want to share just an overview of that foundation for you. I think it's going to help you take in this information. If you are totally unfamiliar with those concepts, this can seem like a really mind-boggling idea, this whole concept of how widespread gender inversion is. So it really is helpful to have this understanding, at least loosely, of Freemason influence and Satanic influence in these major industries. I'm going to share a documentary with this post called X Factor Winner Reveals the World's Secret Religions. This was an excellent documentary I came across that opened my eyes to what's really happening here. I believe it was 2020 I watched this on YouTube. YouTube has since removed it, and those of us in the know, we know what that means, right? The powers that be don't want this information circulating. However, it has now been uploaded to BitChute, so that's an uncensored platform, and I will share the link where you can watch that documentary. It is lengthy, it's about 5 hours, but it's an excellent overview of how the core of Freemasonry is the Luciferian religion, also called the Satanic religion. Now, this can be surprising for people to hear when they're just used to driving past their local Masonic lodge in their small town, and they just think, oh, that's where Uncle George and his buddies go to hang out to have a sense of community. Now, that's true for a lot of people in Freemasonry. However, just like any cult, the lower level initiates and cult members in that group, they don't know what's happening at the higher levels. They don't know what's happening behind the veil. And in order to access the higher levels inside the cult, it requires certain allegiance, often in the form of humiliation rituals, sexual blackmail material, self-mutilation rituals. Now, I'm not just talking about Freemasonry, but this is a common theme in many cults. In order to access higher levels of information within a cult, you have to show your allegiance. And I believe that this is because on a psychological level, if you hurt yourself, if you humiliate yourself through these rituals, you're less likely to share the information that the cult wants to keep secret. And this is absolutely happening in Freemasonry. So the notorious highest level in Freemasonry is 33rd degree Freemason, and in order for people to get up there where they have the information of the satanic and demonic connections inside Freemasonry, they've really proven their allegiance. So they're very unlikely to whistleblow or share with lower initiates what's really happening in Freemasonry. Does that make sense? George Carlin, the famous comedian, calls it the secret club, and you're not in it. That's how he references Freemasonry, and it is a kind of a big club that runs Hollywood, and more people are aware of that. It is the Illuminati. Freemasonry, Satanism, is the Illuminati, especially the higher ranks of that. So go check out that documentary. It's not a quick checkout, like I said, it's about 5 hours long, but it is, if you're a truth seeker, this is very important information to understand just what is happening behind the scenes in Hollywood and politics and in this big club. Who are the movers and shakers? And what are the spiritual connections, the dark spiritual connections that might be facilitating some of the power and money that we see moving in the world? The X Factor winner, the person presenting this documentary, he won X Factor, which is a music competition show. And then that's how he got into Hollywood and saw what was happening. And the solution that he offers, one of them, if I remember correctly, or the solution in that documentary, is specifically the blood atonement theology of Christianity. Now, most Christians stand behind that theology. Most Christians, and I was one of these people, I did not know that the blood atonement theology, and that actually most of the theology in present-day Christianity has little, if nothing, to do with Jesus' original teachings. Blood atonement is the concept that God needs bloodshed, and specifically a violent murder, to forgive people, that God at one point needed animal sacrifices to forgive sins. And this is just false and reprehensible. It's common theology, but that doesn't make it true. And it is absolutely not what Jesus taught during his lifetime. In fact, the earliest and most authentic manuscripts of the Gospels of the New Testament do not have Jesus saying that we should drink his blood in a cup. Like, in the Last Supper speeches in the Gospels, yeah, there are some key sentences that were not in the earliest and most authentic documents we have for that. Now, that can be earth-shattering and very disturbing information for many Christians to hear. And again, I came from this world where we're taught that there is no political or financial influence behind the Bible as we have it today. It's the inerrant word of God, and the God of the Bible is not a projection of human consciousness. It is the ultimate truth, and well, that's simply not true. And so it is important to understand that the Christianity we have today and the understanding we have of Jesus' message today is largely a product of Greek pagan culture. That was the culture from which the Christian religion arose. And so this concept of blood atonement has nothing to do with what Jesus taught. It has a lot to do with Greek pagan culture and sacrifice and the ideas that were so common at that time. Jesus' message, I should work on some audio episodes around this, and I'm certainly going to be sharing a lot more in the coming year and years on this topic. But Jesus' message was not about a vengeful God who needed bloodshed in order to forgive. It's truly reprehensible that that has become our concept of God. And it just goes to show the brainwashing again, which I was under, to believe that the Creator, that is the force of love behind everything, would require that. And in fact, a big part of Jesus' message was to obliterate the temple sacrifice system, which was, in Judaism at the time, the idea that people had to sacrifice animals to get their sins forgiven. But in fact, this was much like the indulgent system of the Catholic Church, where you kind of could buy your way out of sin in order to create profits for the religious system at the time. It didn't have to do with what the Creator, the being of love behind everything, actually wanted. It had everything to do with human greed and human misunderstanding and human exploitation of a warped message of God. So I do say that because I think it's important to go into that documentary, just because blood atonement model, that theology is his solution, and I totally disagree. Again, I came from a background where I never questioned that until I questioned it. Okay, maybe you can resonate with that one. Now that we have the foundation that Freemasonry, this big club that is so influential in celebrity and political spheres, at the core of Freemasonry is Satanism. With that understanding, we can comprehend that there are a lot of generational Satanists in these spheres, in Hollywood, in politics, in finances. And that might sound shocking, but think about it this way. If you go to Utah, you're going to find a lot of generational Mormons. They just pass down their religion, and the nature of religion is brainwashing. It really is. All organized religion has that in common. It's don't question, just believe, ignore your intuition. Here's the creeds, here's the doctrines, here's the rituals, and the more you do the rituals, the more you repeat the creeds, the more you get enmeshed into the system. It's your whole community, it's your whole identity, it's your whole sense of purpose, and oftentimes a true experience of God can get tied up with these other influences, right? And so people just born into generational religion like that just tend to repeat it, okay? So that's one example. I have moved to the Bible Belt after growing up on the West Coast my whole life, and I see generational Baptist groups, generational fundamentalist Christians here. It's just the religion that's passed down in this community. And so, same in Hollywood. The religion that is passed down in that arena is Satanism. Now, religions have differing rituals and rites that are imposed on the members. They're imposed on the children without the children's consent. And these rites and rituals vary in their destructive and harmful qualities, right? So if we are to look at the organized religion of Christianity, one of the rituals is baptism. In many cases, that's sprinkling water on a baby's head. Now, whether or not you believe that does anything, it's a pretty mild ritual. The baby did not consent, but what's the harm there? Just some water sprinkled on the forehead. Okay, no big deal. Okay, so let's look at a more harmful, much more harmful religious ritual that a lot of people don't question, but more and more are questioning now as humanity is waking up, and that's circumcision. A religious ritual we find in Christianity and Judaism, in Muslim cultures as well. And that is very dark, to mutilate the genitals of a baby boy. That's the child is not consenting. The parents are brainwashed. There is financial influence at play. There is demonic influence at play. Again, this could be new information for a lot of people, but all that is happening behind the scenes. And I will do a future audio episode just on that, on circumcision, what's really happening, how we need to heal as a world from this, how men can heal the trauma, because it is absolutely heartbreaking once you go down that rabbit hole. I mean, that was one I went down pretty recently, and oh boy, it had me just on the floor, heartbroken, just in the depths of soul grief the more I learned. I mean, the foreskin, some researchers say, has more nerve endings than the clitoris. And the trauma and the pain can create brain changes that last a lifetime for a man. I mean, it's just horrifying. And we have so much healing to do as a world, as a human family around that. But that's one example of a really destructive and harmful religious ritual that is passed down generationally, that happens to children without the children's consent. And with that understanding, maybe you can see, we're going to stretch this a little more and look at one of the religious rituals in Satanism, which is to gender invert the baby. So the child is not consenting to being transgendered, being raised transgendered, and undergoing transgender surgeries and medication for their lifetime. It is a religious ritual that their parents sacrificed them into. One of the deities in Satanism is the Baphomet. If you've seen a picture of this being, it is both transgendered and transhuman. So transgendered, it has male genitalia but female breasts, so we're combining male and female in one body. And transhuman, it has a goat head, a human body, goat feet, I believe it has wings. And this represents one of the main tenets of the Satanic religion, which is that transcending and conquering God's natural creation is actually a form of spiritual liberation. Now, that is very different than the majority of spiritual and religious traditions, where we would see spiritual liberation as surrendering to God's creation. Like, we would see healing as surrendering to the innate intelligence that is within the divinely created human body, and which is in the divinely created trees and nature and water and food and frequencies around us that we can use for healing. It's a very different philosophy in Satanism. Instead of being in harmony with the divine architecture of reality, being in harmony with divine creation and surrendering, that's the key word, surrendering to that higher power, Satanists believe spiritual liberation is overcoming that higher power, escaping it, conquering it. And so one of the best summaries of this concept I've found is in the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite books. And if you're unfamiliar with this book, it is written in the voice of this master demon who's coaching a younger devil in how to effectively tempt humans. And so the master demon is writing a letter, an advice letter, and this is something he says. In the long run, either our Father, meaning Satan, in this case the devil's writing it, or the enemy, the creator, God, will say mine of each thing that exists, and especially of each man. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to them, whatever happens. At present, the enemy, again meaning God, says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it. Our Father, meaning Satan, hopes in the end to say mine of all the things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Okay, you see that key word? Conquering and transcending what God created. Again, I'm going to have to get more into some of the bad theology here. Bad theology isn't it doesn't hold water to have God pitted against an opposing force that we would call Satan. Evil is the absence of God. It's the absence of truth and love. It's the disconnection from the source of all that is, from the consciousness of love, the energetic reality of beingness, whatever you want to call it. But it is theologically impossible for there to be evil as an opposing force to the Creator. How could the Creator have made that, right? So, again, I grew up in Christianity where we're just told don't question, don't think about these things. So maybe you've never actually thought about that. Like, wait a minute, how can Satan be at war against God? How could God have created an enemy and then that enemy is actually winning if we look at it from a numbers game in Christian theology, right? Where Christian theology says you have to believe these certain creeds and then you'll go to heaven and everybody else is doomed to eternal hell. Like, okay, so then that God's a loser. Like, that God is losing the battlefield. I mean, so I just have to interject with some of the holes in this theology because it will have to be a topic for another time. But I'm absolutely not denying the reality of evil, of demons, demonic influences. That absolutely exists, but it's not that those things are an opposing force to God in that they are substance. They're actually lack of substance. They're vacuum. They're absence of power. Where if God is power, demons are absence of power. But yes, they seem to exert power, but it's only with the absence of power in us agreeing with them. This gets down to the concept that everything is love versus fear. Maybe I'm going too much on a segue here, but this actually does tie into some of the concepts I'm talking about. Like if you start to really get into Satanism in terms of understanding that religion, it's all blood sacrifice. Why? Because demons, which are nothing, they need life force, so you give them blood. Now, that raises the question, like, why do we have the concept of blood atonement in Christianity? That does not reflect what God really is. God does not need blood. God, the source of everything, of life force, of substance, does not need that substance given back to it. You following what I'm saying? This can be a stretch here because it is a shift from what a lot of us are taught in traditional Judeo-Christian culture. But it all ties in, all these concepts, and like I said, I'll do a deeper dive on these topics. So let's get back to this concept that the core of Satanism is conquering and transcending what God has created, and that includes the human body. Transgenderism is a form of, to Satanists, transcending the innate intelligence of the human body that God created. When you understand this concept behind Satanism, you understand why Satanists love creating genetically modified food. That was technology that originated from the Freemasons. And they love creating test tube babies. This transhuman agenda is headed up by satanic religious individuals, okay, at the helm of technology and politics. Satanists love mRNA shots. They love distorting human DNA. Do you see the parallels here? With this understanding, now you can grasp that one of the religious rituals in Satanism is sacrificing the firstborn child to the Baphomet. How is that done? By transgendering the child. So from birth, the child is raised as the opposite sex. The child never has a chance to experience their true body. They are given puberty blocker drugs so they don't go through puberty, and they're given the best transgender surgeries that are available, which actually are far more advanced than most people understand, and even most people would have access to. The top surgeons in this field are exclusively available to these generational Satanist families in politics and Hollywood. And I really want to emphasize just how advanced this technology is and how much a human body can be changed to look like the opposite sex when this transgendering process starts from birth, essentially, right? That the child is not going to go through puberty. The child is going to be put on hormones. It really changes how the child develops so that somebody who is raised transgender is going to look different than somebody who was matured into an adult before that person underwent transition surgery, for example. I'm going to give you a few examples that might sound very shocking of celebrities who are actually the opposite sex. They were sacrificed to the Baphomet. Now, this is so important to understand that these individuals are victims here. I mean, can you imagine that you were born into this sick religion, that you were a child sacrifice, that you never got to experience connection to your true body? Like, talk about your soul not matching up to the body it chose to incarnate in. Can you imagine that? Like, what does that do to their sexual self? What does that do to their mental health? What does that do to their emotional health? Like, we might wonder why there is so much dysfunction within Hollywood, why these people are just so troubled, even though they seem to have it all: the money, the power, the fame, the cars, the et cetera. But how could that ever make up for such an atrocity being done against them? Like, the level to which they were victimized and sacrificed, it really is heartbreaking when you think about it. And I just want to introduce that concept now, because as we get into just how many of these people are gender inverted, it can bring up a lot of feelings of feeling deceived, betrayal, trauma, frustration, anger, and those are all valid emotions. But I'm just encouraging you to understand here, like, what position would you rather be in? Would you rather have been a person who was robbed of the authentic experience of their body as a baby, or somebody who is discovering this really disturbing and uncomfortable truth, right? I certainly would rather be in the latter group. Okay, so let's get into some examples of gender inverted celebrities. You know the TV show Friends? You know, you've got Rachel and Monica and Phoebe. Those are the character names. And Rachel, Jennifer Aniston in particular, was presented by media as the most beautiful woman. Now that, we're going to get into that, why that was happening, but all of those three women are actually biological males. They were all transitioned starting as very young children. And that's why they got these positions in Hollywood. See, that is how this big secret club works. If you are from one of these generational satanic families, then you've got ins in the industry, okay? And it kind of secures for the family that sacrifices their child, it secures benefits for the family, maybe spiritual benefits in terms of demonic connections, which they would see as a benefit, power, money, and then for the child who is sacrificed, that child is often put in what we would think as admirable or enviable roles in society, but they're actually just being used to groom and distort the perceptions of humanity, right? So they're being used to obfuscate human perceptions. Think about it this way. Most of the celebrities that men would believe are the most beautiful women, that men have been groomed to believe are the most beautiful women, are actually biological men. So my theory is that that's happening also as the elites pulling the strings as a mass humiliation ritual for men in general. Men don't realize that they are lusting after other men. Straight men are lusting after other men. Porn stars are transgendered, gender inverted in this process in some cases. Now, oh boy, I'm going to have to do another post on the porn industry, how demonic that is, how it is the deepest levels of warfare against humanity on earth right now. But yeah, I do believe that a big piece of this is to distort a normal person's perception of what is a male body and what is a female body. If I went down the list of all of the actresses in particular in Hollywood, the A-list actresses who are actually biological men, I would be listing most of the actresses. That's the shocking thing. So it's actually easier for me to give some examples of actresses well-known actresses who are biological women. I can give you 3 off the top of my head, and that's it, which is shocking, right? When we're thinking of the top A-list actresses. One of these biological women is Emilia Clarke. One of them is Katherine Heigl. Saoirse Ronan, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, is another one. Those are, to the best of my knowledge and research, biological women, and that is in contrast to the vast majority of A-list actresses who are not. Now we get into the question, how do we know? How do we know who are biological women versus inverted women? And same with male actors. I mean, Ryan Reynolds, definitely inverted. What are some of the other ones? I'm so out of Hollywood, guys, but again, if I were to list the male A-list actors, the majority would come out as being inverted, and a minority actually biological males in that industry. From the technology sphere, we've got Bill Gates inverted, Melinda Gates inverted, Elon Musk probably inverted. I mean, have you seen him in a bathing suit? So this leads me to the next question here, which is, how do you know who is inverted or not? Especially looking at people in Hollywood and political spheres. So the way this works is that there are certain skeletal features that reflect the XX chromosomes or the XY chromosomes. Okay, so these don't change even under the influence of hormone therapy, puberty blocker drugs, and surgeries, which are quite advanced surgeries that can add fat, remove ribs to create more of a waist, change jawline, change so many features of the body. Facial feminization, facial masculinization, adding in the appearance of muscles, using hormones to create more muscles if we're talking about somebody being inverted from female to male. There's just so much that can be done, and it's quite effective. But the underlying skeletal system cannot be changed, and there are some distinct biological differences between the male skeleton and the female skeleton. And they need to be looked at together. So we need to look at multiple aspects of a person's skeletal system to draw some conclusions of if they are biological male or biological female. I'm going to share a documentary that gives a good overview on this. And then there are shorter documentaries where people who call themselves transvestigators, they call it transvestigation, and they look at specific individuals in Hollywood and politics in these arenas to point out all the different features that correlate to, are they the sex they present as or the opposite biological sex. It does take some research, but what I think you'll find, and this was the case for me, was as I watched these documentaries and I started to see what skeletal features they were talking about, it becomes more and more easy to see some of these celebrities and to just realize, oh, that's a man's face hiding behind all that makeup. Like, there's only so much they can do with facial feminization surgery, but you start to see the underlying sex. Similarly, with a lot of the male actors who are actually women, I've started to just look at them and see the woman behind their eyes. Gosh, this is heartbreaking, guys. This is really, I mean, if you have a heart, this is going to break your heart. It's like seeing people who are trapped. They never had a chance to be themselves, and they're being gaslit by the entire world that they have it all and they've got it made. But do they have anything if they don't have the ability to be who they truly are in their bodies? So there are theories out there. You know, I let me just say this. I would put money on the fact that some celebrities are inverted, like some particular celebrities. If you were to say, Lauren, how certain are you that Sandra Bullock is actually a biological male? I'd be like, nah, 99.9%, right? But at the end of the day, I have to be able to say, I don't know for certain about a lot of these. I can make educated guesses. I think that's the best we can do. And especially when we understand how widespread this is, we can make educated guesses that, yeah, when certain people in Hollywood have these features, it's pretty likely that they are inverted. But again, at the end of the day, it's like, how certain can we be? To give you a quick overview of some of these skeletal features that are unique to women or to men and that don't change with transgender surgeries and medications. One of them is the angle at which the legs come out from the hip. So when men are walking, their legs swing out in front in more of a straight line, whereas because of women's skeletal structure, their legs are going to angle more inward. This is called the Q angle, the angle at which the legs come out of the hip joints. So women have more of a natural like crisscross when they're walking, foot kind of crossing over the center line of their body, whereas men's legs will just go out straight. Now, this is where it gets tricky because, for example, transgendered models are taught the catwalk. where they intentionally swing their hips to cross their legs over. And many inverted female celebrities, so those who are actually genetically male, are taught to walk like this or pose in pictures so it appears that their legs come out at that angle. This is why this whole topic does take time. It's like, this is a lie of such huge proportion that it makes sense that we actually have to put some time and energy into understanding the truth, and that the deception really does go deep. But that's one thing. There are pictures, there are videos of celebrities when they're not focusing on putting their legs in the correct position, and you can see that for a lot of these female actresses, they do not have that natural female Q angle to the leg. Another one is how a person's arms fall. So for women, there is a natural tilt outward at the elbows to make room for wider hips. Now, some women like me don't have very wide hips. I did not get the birthing hips over here. But when I stand in front of the mirror and I look at my arms, do this if you're a woman, you can see your arms are going to flare out slightly when your arms are straight, like without a bend in the elbow. They're kind of tilt outward. Whereas male arms, the male skeletal system did not have to evolve to make room for wider hips, and so they fall straighter at the elbow. Again, this is one example, and it's important to look at these in these different aspects of the skeletal system within one person if we're trying to understand what biological sex they are. The best resource I've found for analyzing specific celebrities and politicians and elite individuals to determine if they are their biological sex or if they're inverted is a YouTube channel called Phony Persephone. And the woman who does these analyses on celebrities, she is very articulate, very nuanced. She'll show you these different skeletal features comprehensively. And then she also makes a really important point, which is that as transgender technologies get more and more efficient and advanced, it's going to be harder and harder to tell based on physical appearance. And so something she also focuses on is you can tell the energy behind the eyes, like a soul chooses to incarnate into a male or female body in this lifetime. And so it is interesting when you start to observe the energy behind a person's eyes. If you look at pictures of celebrities and just kind of look at their eyes, there's a different energetic quality of male eyes versus female eyes. Now, this is nuanced, it's a little intuitive, but I don't think it's beyond people's perception. I actually think it's our most fundamental intuitive sense to know whether a human being is male or female. And so even though we've been brainwashed and hijacked through having these inverted people put in front of us on screens 24/7 now, there is still the part of our own inner compass, our own deepest biology that knows male from female. And maybe part of this is the energy behind the eyes. So if you watch some of her documentaries, you might be able to pick up on this. The energy behind male eyes is much more pointed, sharper, and direct. The energy behind female eyes is softer. Now, this is not to say that a woman can't choose to have a very direct, pointed eye contact at times, or a man could choose to have a softer focus to his eyes. That's not what I'm saying. It's kind of hard to put into words, but I really like how this YouTube channel points that out. Is it something I would put money on if I could tell a person's sex based on their eyes? I don't know. I would like to see all these different aspects of their being put together and then make a conclusion. And that's where I see the value in this specific YouTube channel, because she does go into all these different points. And another point to consider is, what is their family lineage? Do they come from a background of people who are in the big secret club? Do they come from a background of money? If we look at, for example, Elon Musk, his mother was from the fashion industry and was throwing Illuminati hand signs around in some of her pictures. So that raises a question. Does that give us some clues that Elon might be inverted? You see what I'm saying? It's looking at a lot of these bigger pictures. I will say that after having done a very deep dive into what people would call transvestigation, yes, there is a term for this, I have seen people take a really dark turn, or maybe they are disturbed individuals and already who come into this into this arena. What I like about Phony Persephone's channel is she has that aspect of compassion for these people who were victimized, whereas some people in the transvestigation world I found can be very angry and bitter. It's almost like the betrayal trauma they experienced of they thought this was reality betrayed them, and they became so twisted and angry that they lash out, and what I would describe as becoming paranoid. I don't think we need to become paranoid about this. I just truly believe that knowledge is power, and that especially if we as women are going to heal the relationship with our bodies, we've got to start realizing the bodies on magazine covers and TV and movies are biological male bodies in many cases. We have been comparing our own female bodies to biological male bodies as the highest pinnacle of the beauty standard. Like, how crazy is that? Let's reclaim our sanity and stop comparing ourselves to male bodies. Men's bodies do not have to have curvature to the abdomen because they don't have a uterus. So if we're looking at our own bodies thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had a flat stomach like those fashion models, like those Victoria's Secret catwalk models, well, yeah, maybe it's because some of them don't have uteruses, and so they don't have to have that curvature to their abdomen. You see what I'm saying? And that's just one example. Biological men who are inverted, they don't have menstrual cycles, so they don't go through the monthly iterations of body changes that biological women go through. Yet we're often comparing our bodies to that male standard. Same with the changes the female body goes through in the lifetime, through menopause and hormonal changes. And that's not happening for these biological male bodies. There's one other quick question I want to address that I get asked when I introduce this topic. That question is, but these celebrities that you're saying are inverted, they're having kids. How is that possible? Okay, so the question I have for you in response is, how do you know they're having kids? Or did you just see some paparazzi pictures of them, women in particular, with a pregnant belly, and then later you saw some paparazzi pictures of them holding a baby? Do you know what happened in that interim time? How do you know that the belly wasn't faked? There are some really interesting pictures out there, and we know you can't just take internet pictures at face value, but you can gather some information and draw some educated guesses. There are some interesting pictures out there with certain celebrities with baby bumps that start to collapse when they sit down, looking much more like a pillow than an actual woman's pregnant belly. It could raise some questions, right? So we know surrogacy is a big thing in Hollywood. Surrogacy is actually a form of human trafficking. I have discussed that before as well, but that doesn't seem to bother people in Hollywood much. So there are a lot of things that can be done to preserve sperm or eggs when the individual is being inverted. That can then be used with in vitro fertilization on a lot of other birth technologies and surrogates. So, I would also hypothesize that these birth technologies that the most wealthy and elite have access to are actually far more advanced than what the average wealthy individual has access to. Okay, so I don't know any of that for certain, but I would make an educated guess about that. So I would just encourage you to remember that just because you've seen somebody with a pregnant belly in Hollywood in some paparazzi picture, and then later you see her holding a baby, it doesn't necessarily mean that she gave birth to that child, especially when there are numerous skeletal tells that her body might likely be biologically male. So there you go. We have covered a lot of ground today. Your head might be spinning like mine was when I first learned this information, and I've done my best to encapsulate it as concisely as possible with a firm foundation of understanding, and then also giving you additional resources with this episode to do your own deeper dives, because it is important, if you're interested in this topic, to start recognizing some of these skeletal features unique to men and unique to women, and you'll be able to start seeing for yourself behind the veils, right? Behind the wigs and the makeup and the surgery, what is really happening in Hollywood and the political arena. That's a wrap for today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.